Okay, we're going to start. Okay, morning everyone. Sorry? What, a good morning? Good morning. It's a very good morning. It's going to be even better, but it's good. So we're in week 4 of the let them theory and let me, as we talked about last week. Yeah, it should have been on already. Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, okay. So let me just put it on for a few minutes so it gets. It's a bit stuffy here. I just realized I haven't set the thing yet. Okay, 1 second. We'll put it off when it gets thing. Okay. Okay. Before we start, if I sound a little bit, if I'm not making sense today, it's because I'm recovering from Purim. It was an excellent Purim, thank God.
You were very drunk.
I don't say that. You can interpret however you want. No, it wasn't in that sense, but it was, yes. It was. Went till very late. Got to sleep at 12 after a day marathon of lots of different beautiful programs. Anyway, so just a little review from last week. We touched a little bit last week, which we're going to develop a bit more today, about bringing, and I'll explain why in a few minutes, about bringing the Jewish perspective into this whole theory and why that's so important, actually. Because we talked about living a life, not just that it's effective or it's a good life, but it's also a life of meaning and purpose. So then we talked about the whole idea of let me, that she said, was sourced in other sort of disciplines where we talked about detaching, which from a Jewish point of view, we said that we do detach. We detach from the control that other people have over us. We detach from the toxic emotions and so on. But then we actually reattach, which is the let me theory, really, which is understanding that the circumstance, the experience didn't go away, and we can actually reflect and learn from it and actually do something about it. Because, as we explained last week, the real power is in our response, and choosing peace and sometimes not responding or letting go or let them, so to speak, is a strength, not a weakness, right? But then we introduced the whole idea of let me, which is the responsibility. Because if you just stay with let them, then it becomes like I'm better than them, like feeling superior, and actually doesn't last. Because then what happens, kind of thing, right? So therefore, we talk about the importance of let me, which is a really important part, which is taking responsibility. What can I do? How did I contribute to the whole process? What is my role? And even if it's nothing, and even if the other person is completely wrong, but still about how do I treat the other person? How do I still show kindness and compassion, and so on and so forth? Okay. So today's topic, obviously, it's the same theory, but we're going to move to a different topic, which is a chapter in the book that deals with stress. Right? Anyone knows what stress means? Okay. It's a great topic because many of us do stress. We stress about small things, which we're going to talk about, and stress even about big things, which he also talks about, and we're going to discuss. So, however, before we start, I want to give just two introductions. First of all, it's important just to define stress, right? Stress is not about being laid back and having an easy life, because that's actually not part of human experience. It's not supposed to be part of the human experience. There's a saying or a pasuk, a verse that tells us, Adam le'amal yivaleh, the person was born to toil, to work hard. Not just to survive physically, or not just to survive emotionally or spiritually, but to actually work. Why? Because we are put here to become a better person, we are put here to grow, growth is difficult. Growth is a difficult thing. Changing ourselves, going beyond our ego, changing our perspectives, changing the way we feel about things is, for the most part, for most people, is actually very difficult, and it's a good difficult. As we explained last week from the Talmud, Yagati, if a person says, I've toiled and found success, then you can believe them. Success doesn't come without working, right? What's the thing I once heard? That the only place that work... I've forgotten how it comes. Anyways.
It's the dictionary.
I don't know, that work comes before stress, or success comes before... I don't know. It's a dictionary, right? I have to remember how it goes. Anyway,
Well,
but...
it sounds like you have to
Success
have a
comes
good
before
home
work.
to get a good
Oh, that's right.
job.
The only place that success comes before work is in the dictionary. That's right. What were you saying? Sorry?
I was saying, it sounds like that saying where you have to work hard to earn a holiday.
Yes, but we're not. Yeah, but that's true, and that's true in regular life. But we're not just talking about working for outcome. We're talking about actually working for values, for who we are, for purpose, exactly, which is even harder in a way. So, and just generally, like a little stress is always good. It brings productivity, because being completely laid back is actually a problem. People who are very, very laid back, often, if they're very laid back, they miss stuff. They don't get stuff done a lot of times. And actually, part of the problem of people being very laid back is they drive everyone else crazy. Like they never respond for requests. I'm sure we all know some people like that, right? Like they don't respond when there's something which is actually a little bit urgent. There's nothing wrong with a bit of urgency. Obviously, we don't plan to have everything urgent in our life, but there is things that come up that are important, that are urgent, and a little bit of healthy stress is okay, right? But what we're going to talk about, of course, is a different type of stress. It's the stress that's bad. It's about stressing out about things that we can't control anyway, and that stress is not going to add anything. So in other words, the difference between good stress and bad stress is good stress actually makes a difference. It allows you to produce more, right? Bad stress is when you're trying to control things that you can't control, number one. And number two, it's a stress that doesn't actually achieve anything. In fact, the opposite is true. It's destructive, which we're going to talk about when we get there. The second introduction I wanted to give is just on this thing why I think it's so important that we bring in the Jewish perspective and how that works and goes together with this theory, which, as I'm reading the book more and more, she obviously doesn't do much of, to be honest. I had an interesting experience. I was talking to someone about BINA the other day. Anyone know what I do, what BINA does, and I was just talking about different parts of BINA and the different streams that we have, and I mentioned the Thursday morning discussion that we have, that's about personal growth, and I told him that I'm currently working through this book called Let Them. I wanted to know if he knew. He says, Let Them, yes, my relative, she tells me all about it all the time. But he was a bit cynical about it, and he said, she tells me about this thing, you got to read it, you got to apply it, and then he says, when someone says something to her she doesn't like, she goes crazy. So obviously she's not applying it very well. So I don't know if that's exactly accurate or not, but it doesn't matter. But I was thinking about it, if you just take, the let them theory, and I was thinking about this in terms of myself, especially the topic of stress. By nature, I can stress, I'm quite a stressful person, but which I've worked on over the years. But it's interesting that when I was reading the book, it's a very, very, I think that the greatness of this theory is its simplicity. It's a tool, it's a phrase, it's something you can use, right? But I think it won't really last if there's not something backing it up. Just as a tool, I don't think it's going to work. It'll work temporarily. Because, life goes back to normal. Not everyone who's going to apply the Let Them theory is going to have the good fortune that Mel Robbins had of then going on to create a podcast which became millions of people here and all that kind of stuff, right? For a lot of people, it's just life continues and it goes back to normal and the challenges come again. You don't get such a huge break and it needs to, and all these things obviously need to be sustained and need to be kept up, right? And we know that when you change, real change, sustained change, is more than just a phrase and it's more than just a tool. It needs to be backed up by a whole mindset shift. As we talked about in the very first session, that we know there are two things that change our emotional state, or change our personality, or impact our personality, and that is the two things on the either side of emotions, which is cognition and action. And those are hard. Those are hard work, right? But the mindset change is a really important thing. It's what backs it up. It's the theories that back it up, which she does in her own book. Every time she talks about a new segment or a new component of the theory, she talks about psychologists that she's talked to, scientists that she's talked to, including in stress, right? So it needs understanding. It needs a mindset process and experience to really back it up. And from a Jewish point of view, I think that, again, I as I've said to you, I think the let them theory is very in line with Jewish thought. The let me theory also is the way she explains it. As I told you, I was a bit worried in the beginning because I go crazy when I hear the word me. But it's normally connected with ego and me and this and the other and my truth and my authenticity and all this rubbish. But actually, this is actually a very good application of let me. It's about take responsibility. It's about how you reflect, about how you change the way you talk to people, about what you can do, how you can contribute to the whole process, which is excellent. But essentially in the book, it's really taught as a tool, as a short tool and as a concise tool, which is its greatness. It's really something to always remember and always, you remember that phrase and you keep it in your mind, you remember the let them and then the let me. It's very, very, very powerful. But it really does need something deeper, I think, to prop it up and to reflect on, which is why for me, I think it can only work, because since I've read the book, I've actually applied it in my own mind, but it only works for me if I combine the Jewish perspective and the idea of purpose, the idea of Hashgacha Pratit, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to bring it in again today because I think it's really, really important to do that, which is part of why we're doing the series. Okay. So, stress. So the first part, she has two parts on stress. The first part on stress is the little things that stress us, and some of it is very good because it describes real life situations which we all experience. And then the second part is going to be about bigger stress, like things that you actually legitimately get stressed about, right? So she says the fastest and most effective way to start using the let them theory is to rise above the countless tiny stresses you face every day. Like, she gives a couple of examples, like, you go on the internet and your computer's slow that day, right? The unexpected change of plans, something we've talked about a lot. The endless meetings at work, the inconsiderate behavior of other people, the long lines, the slow walkers, right?
Slow walkers.
I suffer from this in the car, actually. I always give car examples, right? She does, she gives a plain example, but actually I give car example all the time. One of the things that really stresses me, which I've been thinking about a lot lately, because it's like really not good to get stressed about it. I don't know, there are a lot of people, like I'm not such a fast driver, but there are a lot of people that drive very slow here in Sydney. I don't know if you noticed it. Maybe it's one of you I've got stressed about. No, I don't know, maybe not. Like you're at a traffic light, it's a very small one, it's turning green, and it's only a small window. And it's turned green like 4 seconds ago, and the front guy hasn't moved yet. Like, what are you schluffing? Like,
I get this all the time when I come down.
yeah, like just move. It's green. Move. Come on, put your foot on the accelerator. Right?
And then the next question you ask, does it really matter?
Correct. Exactly. That's the point, right? And it's more than that. Actually, it's really more than that, right?
To quote you, when you said quite a while ago, when you get stuck in traffic, it's where you're meant to be.
Exactly. No, 100%. No, I was talking about. No, for sure. 100%. I got into trouble now, you see. Now I was talking about my default position.
Well, I do that.
And it works. It works. I'm trying to practice what I preach. It doesn't work every time. Like my mother used to always ask me, "Do you practice what you preach?" She used to love the Thursday morning share. She listened to every single Thursday morning. I would send it to her. But she knew me very, very well. So she was always a bit doubtful when I'm actually practicing what I'm preaching. So that's the thing, right? She says it's not, I get that people can be annoying, like example, and you have a lot on your plate and all that kind of stuff, but it's not only easy to let, and it's not only easy to let go, it's not always easy not to let it get to you, but it's dumb, right? And she says, of course, that in the next few chapters we'll learn about how to use let them theory to protect yourself from unnecessary stress, essentially by learning what you can't control, right? And then she says the following. She says, just stop and ask yourself, why do you have to let a long line on the coffee shop ruin your day? I guess it's similar to what you just said, right? Why is the traffic putting you in a bad mood? Why do you feel overwhelmed when someone interrupts you during an important task? Why does a person talking loudly on the phone in public irritate you? It's fantastic. Why does a family member's unsolicited advice feel like a personal attack? Why does someone else's slow pace in a busy walkway make you feel rushed, right? She could add one, but she doesn't know this. Like in a few weeks, it's Pesach, right? So why is there long lines at the store? And why doesn't people hurry up? And why is the till person, the cashier, is taking so slow? And why is the stuff I'm always looking for not in stock? That would be a good Sydney example. Okay, so, right? So she says, I felt myself starting to get agitated. I had a meeting. I had to get back home. I wanted to turn to the person behind me and shake my head and say, like, can you believe this, right? But I hesitated because she had this experience. Should I hesitated, I said, let them to myself. The effect was immediate. I softened. Did it speed up the cashier? No. Right? But it gave her relief. And that's, I guess, the power, again, of the let them. It's like a short thing. It's a reminder. You kick in, right? She says, the 10 extra minutes that this line was going to take wouldn't negatively impact the rest of my day, but allowing myself to get agitated and annoyed about something I couldn't control absolutely would. And that's the point. And it's a shift that we have to make, right? It's a shift that we really have to make, that the 10 minutes actually doesn't matter. We're going to take it deep in a minute, but just on a very practical level, the 10 minutes we have to make probably isn't going to make a big difference in our lives for most of us, 99% of the time. I mean, for some person on the odd occasion, it might mean they miss a very important meeut, but they could also just give up the coffee and make an coffee when they get to the office. But not as good. But you could do it. but the stress will make a difference. This is the point we have to know. Bad stress makes a difference. Bad stress makes you being not productive. It takes away your creativity. Because as we'll see later, and she explains it very, very nicely physiologically, which is important to know also how it works in our brain, it actually shifts it goes to a different part of the brain. And we're surviving in a different mode, and that mode is not a mode of routine, it's not a mode of creativity, it's not a mode of productivity. It's a mode where you just don't make decisions properly and you actually ruin your whole day. It takes away your happiness, your calmness, everything. So you got to weigh up. Is the 10 minutes going to make that difference? No, but stress will make that negative difference. And that's why you have to give up what you can't control. And we'll see how the get me works in a minute as well. She says, when you let the world around you impact your emotional state and peace of mind, you become a prisoner to these external forces, right? And really what it means is you become a prisoner to yourself. Because most of us, the default responses are very toxic and negative. Like we blame and we get upset about other people's stuff that we can't control anyway. We let them control us. In other words, we really not free ourselves. Because as we know, we've talked about it, it's Edith Eger, Viktor Frankl, all these people that we've quoted along the years, that freedom is in your mind, right? Which of course is very connected to the upcoming festival, which is Pesach. Now that we finish with Purim, Pesach comes. And of course, we've talked about this before, that Pesach, the main mitzvah is one of the main mitzvahs is the mitzvah of eating matzah on the first night, Shmura Matzah. And that Shmura Matzah is all about freedom. Because freedom, from a Jewish point of view, is really one thing. You know, the Maharal of Prague talks about this, and he says an amazing thing. If you look at the Haggadah on Pesach night, we eat matzah to remember the freedom, or to experience freedom, right? Because that's what Pesach is, it's about experience freedom from ourselves, really. Freedom from being trapped in our own ego and not being able to have the ability to choose wrong from right, right? As we said a few weeks ago, freedom is not freedom to do what you want. Freedom is to have the ability to choose morality over immorality, right over wrong, and so on. But what stops us doing that is our own ego, right? Our ego traps us. Our ego is very self-centered and therefore encourages us to do things and to make choices that are not good for us, right? In all areas of life. Now, it's interesting that we eat matzah to remember the freedom, because the Jews, when they went out of Egypt, they couldn't bake bread and the whole thing, right? So it's about the freedom from Egypt, or freedom from our own Egypt for that matter. But it's interesting that in the Torah, the great Maharal of Prague talks about this. In the Torah, yeah, sure. Sorry, there's a... No, you got to take from the bottom there. I just need to open a bit of window, otherwise it starts to. There we are. That should be fine. It's the system here, it makes noise if you close the door, but if you open the window, it's fine. It's got to do the circulation. Anyway, so in the Torah, matzah is referred to as lechem oni, which is poor man's bread. Poor man's bread, right? Poverty. Why is it poor man's bread? Because it says poor people used to eat matzah, because and also a broken piece of matzah. That's one of the reasons that we break the matzah, the middle matzah on the Seder plate, because it's called bread of affliction, or poor man's bread, right? So the Maharal of Prague asks the question, he says, that's a really strange thing. We do things on Pesach night to remember the bitter times, right? To remember the exile, not just the freedom, like eating bitter herbs and things like that. But matzah is supposed to be because we're remembering the freedom. So why would matzah be called poor man's bread? And he develops this beautiful idea of that when we talk about poor man's bread, we're not talking about negative poverty when someone doesn't have what to eat. We're talking about, I'm paraphrasing in English, but he develops this idea called positive poverty. Positive poverty means that what you need to do before you can break loose of yourself, before you can actually have freedom, you need to strip yourself of everything and surrender to something higher than yourself. Then you can reintroduce yourself in a much more healthy context. But the idea is that you strip yourself of your ego, you strip yourself of self, that stop being trapped in yourself so much so that you can get rid of your ego, which is the idea why it's not allowed to be chametz, because chametz, as we've talked about, rises and represents the concept of ego, right? But the only way to be real free is to completely get rid of yourself so that I can break free and reset and have a paradigm shift. So that's the concept of freedom, and that's really what we're talking about here. We continuously get upset about what other people do and what they say and how they stay in the line and the car doesn't let us go and the car at the traffic light, the whole thing, because why? Because we're just busy with ourselves. And we need to take a step back. We need to become free. The let them is a good phrase to express that freedom, but it's about that. It's about stop being a prison because of your own ego and letting everyone else's failures control you, right? And it's a hard work. Why? She says, the reason it's hard to manage your stress is that your reaction to what's happening around you is automatic. And you feel your whole entire body go on edge, which is true. That's the default position of most people, right? Except for a few people that are born saints. But otherwise, most of us have that default setting that we get, right? It's like you get swept up in an emotion, and the next thing you know, you send the text you regret, right? That's what I always say, like if you get a really bad email from someone, you got to wait 24 hours before you respond, right? Because our default position is to tense up, get defensive, get upset, ruminate, get really angry, and then send off a text or an email that we don't like, that you regret afterwards, right? Now, of course, I said let's just talk about the 10 minutes that you're wasting on the coffee line, right? Or in the traffic. So the question you asked is a really good one. It doesn't really matter. Does it matter? Is the 10 minutes I wait going to make a difference? The answer is no, it's not going to make a difference. But from a Jewish perspective, it's much deeper than that. It's not just that the 10 minutes is nothing. Actually, the 10 minutes is everything. Because it's your chance to stay calm. It's your chance to make a good choice. It's your chance to be a better person. Because when you take it from a Yiddishkeit point of view, like I said last few weeks, you have to factor in two things. That everything happens b'hashgacha pratit. Everything, if maybe they're doing the wrong thing, but that's got nothing to do with me. If I'm stuck for 10 minutes, it's supposed to be. Like you said, you are where you're meant to be. And because I'm supposed to be, that means there's a purpose. I just need to figure out what that purpose is. And the purpose might be to work on yourself. This might be the purpose. To grow as a human being. To learn that it doesn't matter. To learn that you should be a calm person. To learn not to insult the person in front of you. To learn not to get angry, even if you're getting angry quietly. To learn not to swear in the car angrily at the other driver, even though they don't hear you, because it's not good for you. Right? So those 10 minutes, not just that it's not going to make a difference, it's going to make every difference in a positive way. If you understand, this is a test that was just given to you, an opportunity that was just given to you, and it's an opportunity to grow. That's the tachlis. Or you might find a different purpose. I think I told you the story once, you might find something in your pocket that you can read, or you might be able to listen to something with more concentration that's meaningful and purposeful. You might be able to make a phone call in the meantime. You might just say, okay, it's going to take a long time, I'll make a phone call to a friend that I haven't seen for a while. Or do something kind, whatever the case is. But the 10 minutes is an important 10 minutes. Because it was meant to happen. And if it was meant to happen, you need to now figure out what you're going to use it for. Because that's what purpose means. It's about living with purpose, right? Then she goes on and she tells this whole story, what she calls the airport stress test. Now the airport isn't generally a stress test, because airport and flying can be very stressful. On all levels. Rabbi Levi's parents-in-law came from Melbourne last Thursday. They came to spend a couple of days with the grandkids and the kids and all that. And they went to the airport, they took a night flight. and it started to rain in Sydney, so it got cancelled. That's a stressful thing. Everyone knows it's stressful, right? When you get a flight cancelled, which happens often today, and when all these things happen, your flight will be okay, hopefully. It'll be okay, don't worry. Right. So she says that lots of things happen at the airport, and it's interesting, because when it's not you and you watch other people do this, you see how crazy it is. Have you ever seen people like scream at the person at the counter in the airport, right? As if they control the airlines. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's so if you scream disrespectfully at someone who actually has control to make something different, it's not right. But at least there's some room in seichel, as they say. You know what I mean? It makes sense on some level. Maybe you scream at them, they'll actually do something for you. But when you scream at just a young teller a young person standing at the counter in the airport, they're not going to reinstate the flight. It's not like they're going to make the flight go because you screamed at them. They have no power. They have just the same power as you have, right? They just follow instructions. So it's really stupid if you think about it, right? But anyway, we all do it. So she tells a story that goes like this. Her line is, you can't control what other people think. Anytime you try to, you lose your power. So she tells this really interesting story. She tells a story about she was on a plane, and the guy behind her was coughing, but like coughing incessantly. Right? You've had that experience? He says that deep chest hack that he's bound to get everyone around them sick. Right? So the first few minutes she didn't think it was so bad, but then it continued on and on. He started clearing his throat, kept coughing, and I got really annoyed. I was flying to an event that I had to give a speech, and over the next couple of weeks I was speaking at a number of big events. I could not afford to get sick or lose my voice. I turned around to look through the crack between the seats and saw him just open-mouthed coughing into the air, as if no one else was on this plane. I thought, this guy is really going to get me sick. It's so selfish and rude. I can't get sick. I considered my options. Being passive-aggressive wasn't going to solve anything. As much as I kept huffing and puffing in my seat and glaring at him between the cracks, trying to make evil eye contact, he was either not picking up on my cues or he didn't care. So I considered flagging over the flight attendant and complaining, but he was sitting right there. So he'd hear me, which would feel really weird. So I decided to turn around like a mature adult and ask him politely, "Sir, could you please cover your mouth?" That was an awkward pause. He nodded and then proceeded to cough openly for the rest of the plane ride. I know this because I kept turning around and looking through the crack between the seats. Obviously you feel bad for the guy. It's not like he wants to be sick. When you have to cough, right? But in the heat of the moment, I was getting more and more annoyed. I was not only stressed out, but I was now ruining my mood and making it impossible to get some work done. She makes that point because this is the point she makes. When you get stressed, she's getting stressed about something that might happen. She might get sick. She might ruin a trip. But what she was actually doing was ruining what she's trying to do now. Because one way to stay calm on a plane is actually to get something done. Right? You can actually learn something, you can study something, you can take out your laptop and do some work, right? So that's just one example of how something happening around you can easily stress you out and negatively impact your body and hijack your brain. Okay. Now, she pauses, which is a very interesting thing, and I just want to share it with you because it's interesting to see how the brain works and how those emotions sort of kick in, right? So she talks about a conversation she had with a very, very big expert on stress, Dr. Aditi Nerukar or something, I don't know. She's a physician at Harvard Medical School and a big expert on stress management. And she says stress is a much bigger problem in your life than you realize. So she explains it physiologically, and I'm normally not very good at this stuff because I wasn't very good at biology in school. I can never remember the names, anyway. So I normally skip that out of the books. But actually, in this chapter, she explains it very, very. It's like for dummies like me in that area. So it's actually, I'll share it with you because I finally understand it. So it's actually a physiological thing that happens in the brain, right? So what we have is, we have what's called the prefrontal cortex, right? Of our brain, which is a part of our brain, how we normally act, right? So it's the part of our brain that actually lets us function, make decisions, plan, strategize, the normal kind of slow, or not so slow, but rhythmic, right? Routine way of planning, going forward, making calculations and so on, is that part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. And normally that's in control. And that's the part of the brain which she says it helps you run your day-to-day life, right? organize, remember things, guide your decision making, and so on. However, when you go stressed, what happens is there's another part of the brain. It's called the amygdala, right? Now, every time I read about this, they say the amygdala is the oldest part of the brain. That part is not a Jewish idea. Every part of the brain is as old as every other part of the brain. They're all created together. So, in the first person, Adam and Eve. But nevertheless, God created that brain, different parts of the brain, for a reason, right? Because there is real stress in life and fear and anxiety, which is absolutely critical. If you see something dangerous, or if you see a little child or grandchild running towards a street where there's cars going up and down, you stress, and so you should. You're right. And so what happens then is your functioning switches from the prefrontal cortex to your amygdala, because the amygdala is a whole different part of the brain, right? It's the deepest part of the brain, actually. And what it does is it induces the famous fight, flight, or freeze. And normally freeze is not a good idea, it's just what it does to you. Freeze is not actually such a good thing, but it's fight or flight, right? So if you see that little child going to the street, you run like a crazy person to schlep him or her away from the oncoming cars, right? If you see an animal, a wild animal, you run, or whatever the case is. Or you fight something. If someone's about to attack you, you could fight. Or you can run away, or if you freeze, that's, again, not such a good idea, but that's what people do, right? It's the stress response. It's the stress response which God created because it's critical. The only thing is, it's not critical to be used 17 times a day in a normal life, right? Sorry? Or be in it all day, exactly, right? So that's the point. The point is that when someone's coughing, when someone's doing something, and we get really annoyed and we become tense, so what happens is the reason then why we actually become non-productive is because we have made a choice almost to switch to a different part of the brain. We switch to the amygdala, which means we get into flight, fight response, which is why you turn around and you scream at the person, or you get annoyed with yourself, or you scream at the person, you don't scream at the person, but you scream at the person within yourself, which means you're not in your prefrontal cortex, which means all your other parts of your life go away. So you actually can't do anything, right? So you stress out for 3 hours on the plane because the guy's coughing, but actually you just wasted 3 hours of your life because you haven't done anything with it. Just on a very simple level, right? So it's a nice framework just to understand what happens and to get a better understanding why stress is actually really bad for us, because we're using a part of the brain which actually is reserved for very specific circumstances. It's reserved for emergencies that happen, and when that happens, we should not be productive. We should not be on our computer doing work. We should actually jump and do what needs to be done. That's correct. But not when we're stressing out about things that people are doing that we can't control anyway, right? And that's the whole problem with being stressed. Yeah.
We're going to go into bigger stresses.
Yeah.
Does that also function through the amygdala?
Yes.
Because
Thing is, there it's more legitimate.
in Israel,
Correct. But then you have to legit. So in other words, small stresses are really. I guess the difference is like this, right? We'll get to what you do with it, but I guess the difference is small stresses are things that really we shouldn't be experiencing. Otherwise, we need to train ourselves not to get annoyed when someone's in the line, right? And maybe it's about getting used to let them and saying it, so we switch back quickly. It's not a whole process. Especially we have the philosophy and the perspective behind it, so we understand it, and we should really become a better person than that and a calmer person. Big stresses, it's legitimate to become stressed. So then there's a process, what you do with it to get back into your proper brain, right? So that's different. Yeah, but I mean, when you hear a siren and you've got 1 minute or something, whatever it is, to run to the mamad, that's amygdala stuff. I mean, that's flight, right? And then they're trained that they flight. I mean, they don't freeze, they're free flight, right? They can't fight because it's a long way away, but they can, and it's not in their capability, but they can run, and that's what they do.
But when it becomes so resilient.
Yes, so we'll see, we'll talk about, yeah. So they are resilient, but they still run, right? So for that moment, it is a stress. You ask any of them, I mean, that's a stressful thing. And it's a stress, and it's a good stress, but they're very good at jumping back, right? I mean, I don't know, just while you're on topic, I don't know if you saw videos, it was unbelievable about the Purims that were going on in the shelters. I mean, it's crazy.
The table is all set and the rest of the house is demolished.
Yes, that was one in Beit Shemesh. The Purim meal was all set up, but people were dancing. There were Megillah readings in bomb shelters. There was Purim dancing. I don't know if I said it to you. Maybe I mentioned it on Purim, but I saw a video of in the Sheba hospital, they created this whole underground under thing, and they were schlepping the machines to set it up, and the underground thing, and all the people, they were singing Purim songs as they were schlepping. They're unbelievable. Anyway.
There was a wedding overnight.
There was a wedding in the
In a car park, all these things, they just make it happen. But the initial run is of course a flight and flight response, definitely, but it's a legitimate one. That's the difference. Okay. Now, and that's also got to do with the perception that others have of us and all that thing. So again, taking it now from the scientific, that's what happens scientifically and physiologically. But again, going sort of deeper into the idea, also the perspective that we need to build. Not so much with the plain story, but with other things when we get annoyed at people in the line or taking their time, or we get stressed about being late, or we get stressed about other things. Also has to do with our whole perception. Again, that whole, first of all, it's got to do with an inner self-esteem. Like sometimes we get stressed because we have to get something done because what will that person think, right? We have to get the house spick and span because someone's dropping off something, and they might walk to the kitchen and see a dish that's not dirty, right? Someone in my house suffers from that, not me. But some of you might have noticed. But what's that? She is. But the truth is that you're not a bad person if someone walks to your house and sees a bit of a mess, and you're not a less of a person if you're late to a meeting because it was a legitimate excuse. You can be respectful and just call ahead and say, I'm going to be late, right? So all these things we need to do, and also the again coming back the long line in the airport, or even the person, So she goes to what she did in terms of that person. Everything is meant to happen. This is the thing, right? And it meant to happen for a purpose. So she comes back to what she calls this plain story, and she talks about hacking your stress response, right? Taking your power back and getting back to let me. Let them and then let me, right? So she says when something happens, you say let them. But then you got to regain your power, right? And then you got to regain your power means you own your reactions and you do something about that, right? So first of it is they're coughing, let them cough. Let them, it's nothing to do with me. I'm not going to stress out. Now, in that example, it's interesting because in that example, the let me becomes very important because what do you mean let them cough? But I still don't want to get sick, right? And that was a problem. So eventually, when she exercised the let them, right, and she'd calm down, then she could decide, okay, now what am I going to do about it? Because staring at him, getting mad at him, again, is getting stressed about something you cannot control. This is such an important thing in living, about not controlling things that we can't control, right? Everyone likes to do that, just people do it at different levels. Some people like to control the whole world, but we all like to control something that we can't control, right? So she says, instead of getting enraged in my seat, I just let him cough. And then I let me focus on simple actions I could take in order to protect myself, that's all. So she says, I'm going to cover my nose and mouth with my scarf, I thought, and I'm going to put my headphones on to drown out the coughing. And that's what I did. And with my scarf over my nose and mouth, I turned up my music on my headphones, problem solved. But you can never come up with that if you're in stress mode. Because you can't make a decision when you're in your amygdala. You're just stressed, you're just annoyed, you're just fighting, you're just running, you're not fighting, you're freezing, whatever the case is. You're dysfunctional. Except for fighting the problem. But really you're dysfunctional. When you say let them and you let get it and you give up control, and then you decide, now let's go to let me, I own the story, I take responsibility, I have now a problem. My problem is I could get sick from this guy. Maybe he's doing the wrong thing, but that's not my point. It's nothing to do with me. So I become creative. You can only be creative if you go back to your prefrontal cortex, right? And that's what happens. And then she says she says, let's take it up a notch. Because a stranger coughing on the plane is a pretty straightforward situation. You'll eventually get off the plane, move on with your life, and so on. And therefore, let them and let me, it's hard, but it's basically simple and doable. But then we talk about, let's get on to the bigger stresses. And I think with this one, we really need to connect with the real deep Jewish stuff, Jewish perspective as well, to understand how this all works. So, what is the real stuff? So, for example, one of the examples she gives is work, right? According to research, I didn't know this, but according to research, work is the number one cause of life stress for most people. And your manager has as much impact on your mental health as your spouse. That's what she writes, right? So there's work stuff. She gives examples that you've done all your work and you're sitting in a meeting and you're having a brilliant idea and they just ignore you and go on to the next person. Or you've earned that raise or promotion that just never comes, right? Obviously, relationships is another big stressor. What's happening in Israel is another big stress, right? So how do you use the let them theory not to let work stress you out? For example, if you're doing a great job, hitting all your numbers, going above and beyond, and your boss just isn't giving you that promotion, right? So she says, and that's a real thing because that's important to a person. I mean, a person losing a job is a really, really big thing, right? Or if you're not losing a job and you're staying there, but you are getting these real knocks all the time, they're much deeper, much more personal than just some guy standing in the line and moving slowly, or even some guy coughing on a plane. It's a very, very different stress, right? But she says, as overwhelming as work might be now, you are not powerless. The question is, how do you use the let them theory to get your boss to give you the promotion you deserve? So here's how it works, right? And I want to get into a whole idea that we've talked about many times, but it's really important to understand how it works. It's very interesting, and I think this comes again from the Pesach story as well, that we don't see, sometimes with stressful things and big stress, it is stressful, and they're legitimately stressful. We don't see the opportunities in life, right? We don't see the opportunities in life. What do I mean by that? We don't see them because another one of the human weaknesses is that we stay in familiar circumstances. We stay in familiar, right? Now, this happened when the Jews left Egypt, right? You just have to picture it. This is the Pesach story. You can use this for your Seder, right? The Jews are enslaved for 210 years. 86 years of the 210 was very brutal, right? They couldn't anymore. They were crying out to Hashem, all that kind of stuff, right? And they've been oppressed on all different levels. God comes and He reveals Himself, and there are 10 miraculous events, 10 plagues, right? That was clearly the hand of God. He tells them that you're going to go out. He tells them how to do it. He tells them how to prepare. Eat matzah on that night. Eat the korban Pesach. The next morning you're going out, right? They go out. Moses leads them out free. They have full of faith, and they're going in. And then suddenly a little glitch along the way. They're not sure where they're getting water, right? And suddenly they don't know what to do. It's a new situation. Because as much as they were oppressed in Egypt, they had water daily. They had food daily, right? And they start complaining. Why did you take us out of Egypt? I'll tell you even more. Not the whole Jewish nation left Egypt. We have a tradition that 4/5 of the Jewish nation did not leave Egypt. That's a huge amount of people. They didn't want to leave. And we are taught Kabbalistically that after the Torah was given that we became a nation, there's no opting out. So when Mashiach comes, we're all going to get redeemed. When good things happen, we're all going to get them. But they weren't a proper nation yet, and therefore it was their choice. So when 4/5 of the Jewish nation didn't want to go out, they didn't go out. But God didn't take them out. And they perished there. Why? Because sometimes we have an opportunity to free ourselves, and we don't want to leave what we're in now, as bad as it is. Right? Sorry? Yeah. So therefore, her point is, let them and then let me. So if the boss is being mean to you, or it's a toxic relationship, or whatever it might be, let them. It's their problem. You know you did the work well. You know you operated well. You know that you're on the right side of morality. Let's say to take the Israel situation, for example. It's a bit different there because there's like real stress you really have to have for a while. But then take the power back and say, let me. And with a job, you obviously need to look for a different job. You need to make the move. It's so stressful to do that, but that's obviously your sign. If it's not working, don't make a choice to stay in a stressful situation. And people do that. Many, many years ago, I had a couple. I'm always remember the story. It was bizarre. And it was a mismatch from the beginning, from day one. It was a complete mismatch. And like, they were just completely killing each other. and he wanted out, and it was right. And she didn't want to, she was overseas, and she didn't want to go. She sat with me for hours, trying to tell me that I should help, but at the same time, for like an hour and a half, telling me how bad he is. Until I turned to her and said, I really don't understand what you're telling me. If he's so bad, why wouldn't you want out? You would have a complaint if you want out and he doesn't want to give you a get, for example. That's understand. That's a legitimate complaint. He's such an evil person and you want to stay in? If he's evil, get out. He has the opportunity. He wants to divorce you. Right? But people do that. But sometimes you need to know, and this is like, again, the Pesach message. The Mitzrayim, the Egypt that you're familiar with, you need to get out of it. If you know that it's Egypt, if it's so oppressive. Now, that doesn't mean you always have to get out of every situation. Sometimes you need to first do what you can to make it right, because where you are is where you're meant to be, and it's the same thing with the relationship, and obviously that's why, obviously a relationship, you try work it out if you can, you try improve it, and sometimes relationships that are a bit broken, that become improved, they become improved to a greater strength than they were before, because sometimes when something is broken and you fix it, it's stronger than before. But it's not always possible. Sometimes it comes to a point where it's clearly not going to change, and it's clearly toxic. So you need to make that move. It's a courageous move, but that's the move you need to take. Whether it's a job, whether it's a relationship, whether it's something else ongoing and important or personal. And when you take it from the Jewish perspective, it goes even more than that, because you have to really believe that parnasa, our sustenance, or our relationships, or our blessings in lives come from God. And that's where the idea of bitachon comes in, right? If God doesn't want you to make a living, you won't. If He wants you to make a living, you will. Now, He also wants you, and this is the Jewish idea, which we have called bitachon and hishtadlut. He also wants you to do something that will create what we call in the Hasidic terminology a keli, a vessel for God's blessing, right? But if that vessel isn't, because obviously at the back of the person's mind, but I know my boss is so mean, but at least I have a salary, so I can't make a move. Yes, but that salary doesn't come from your boss. That's a foundational Jewish idea. I mean, he writes the check, but it actually comes from God. God allows that blessing to come to you. Your vessel till now was this boss. But you could do a different vessel, it's the same blessing. So as leap of faith, you will do something, and you will have bitachon, and you will understand that you've received the sign. The sign is that you're allowed to make a move. You received an opportunity. The best example of this is just a very, very good friend of mine that I talk to. He consults with me sometimes. He lives in a different part of Australia. Got made redundant in a very good position after many, he was doing two things actually, but he was part-time, and just out of the blue they decided, no, they're cutting costs, and boom. I think they were very stupid for letting this guy go. I know the guy is unbelievable, he's really good. I know the people that let him go, I think it was dumb. But he was an amazing example of this. He called me up, he spoke it through with me, we're good friends. And he says, I think it's just an opportunity. And I just met him again a few weeks later, and he says, it was the most amazing thing. I don't understand what they did, but it's the most amazing thing. And he was really, I don't think he's read the book, but he was really able to let them and then let me. Really able to say, this is my opportunity, this means I have to go full time into what I was doing before, and make it bigger, and make it better, and it's going to be okay. Right? But that's a step. He realized his Mitzrayim, his Mitzrayim, it's time to leave. Time to be free. It's an opportunity. Why? Because again, hashgacha pratiti, he realized if it happened to him, the other guy might have made a wrong choice and hurt his business or his institution. But he understands if it happened to me, it's meant to happen. So here's my chance. He looked at it as an opportunity, not as a thing, right? Where's the purpose in it? Well, how can I use it out? How can I grow as a human being? By the way, that goes back to people in Israel. Of course they have to run to shelters, but they're so unbelievably resilient because they live with a purpose. And therefore, for them, even, and I heard this when I was in Israel, even for people who went through the most horrific things on October 7th. Of course they went through trauma, and of course they went through pain, and the pain remains. But they're also but they're also able to turn to themselves afterwards and say, okay, what do I do now? The let me, by the way, over there is unbelievable. No victimhood. I'm not blaming anyone else. What do I do now? Let's rebuild. Some of you might have heard this mayor of Eshkol, I forgot what it's called, but down south, right? If you heard of Michal, that lady, right? Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Not a and let's not be silly. She's going through a lot of pain. I mean, what happened to her environment was unbelievably shattering. Pain doesn't go away. But in very, very nice Israeli style, she says, snap out of it. Not always a good idea, by the way, to tell someone when they're going through pain. But that's the Israeli way, that's the Israeli expression. But there are more slow and softer and calmer ways of doing it. But that's what she did, right? She actually, unbelievable. I've never seen someone who has no victimhood whatsoever. What's my purpose now? What am I going to do now? Let them and let me. Let me take it back, right? And that's what it is. It's really unbelievable. So even with the very, very big stresses. So a guy in the coffee, drinking coffee, coffee on the plane or standing in, you let them and you let me and you stay calm and you do something with that 10 minutes. But if it's something more monumental like a relationship or business, you do the same thing just with different perspectives and just with different strategies. It's not me. I know what I am. I have to reflect. I have to be honest with myself. I know what I've accomplished. I know what I've tried to do. I know what I've tried to be productive. It's their problem now. But then what's left me? What am I going to do? Not be a victim and blame. I'm going to do something. Especially I'm going to believe that really the blessing comes from God. So I'm going to actually take this as a sign, take this as an opportunity, as hashgacha pratit, and then there's obviously a lesson in this, obviously opportunity in this, and that's what I'm going to do. So therefore, that's the letting them is a detachment from the pain that others are causing. Let go of control of things you cannot control, but then you decide, let me, what am I going to do about it? And how's it going to work for me? And what purpose am I going to give it? Right? Because at the end of the day, life is about purpose and values, and how am I going to use this to achieve purpose, to something else, and to move forward and to become a stronger person.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a wonderful week.